Hi, I'm Dylan Gowan, and welcome back to another installment of Overkill Reviews, Banger TV's weekly heavy metal review show. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our Patreon campaign. We're trying to hit our stretch goal of doing a Lockhorns marathon where we get to talk about prog and folk metal. Speaking of folk, this week we're breaking all the rules. We're reviewing an album that came out a couple weeks ago, but since it charted so high on our monthly Patreon poll, we're reviewing it now. It's a new album from one of my favorite folk metal bands, Helveti, with their new album, Atignatos, out now on Nuclear Blast Records. So like I said before, Helveti is one of my favorite folk metal bands. If you don't know who they are, here's a little bit of a bio. Helveti started out in 2002 in Switzerland and have quickly established themselves as one of the leading acts within folk metal, blending traditional folk instruments with folklore, history, and combining that with modern extreme metal. It's been a few years since the band have released their acoustic offering known as Evocation Part 2, and this album is now more of a return to form with Helveti, how they're going back to their heavier side, with key members such as Ivo, Merlin, and Anna Murphy leaving the band a few years ago to form their own project known as Cellar Darling, pretty much leaving big shoes to fill within the band. Myself, who are big fans of those three key members of the group, we're all kind of speculating about who is going to replace them, who is going to take the lead of a lot of their songwriting approaches and all stuff like that. So with their 8th studio album, we get to hear the more heavier side of a lot of the newer members. So let's see how they stack up. So the album starts out in familiar fashion with Helveti, where it has this over-dramatic narration that goes right into this kind of mid-tempo section of the song with soaring vocals, and then it kicks right into intensity. And what I've noticed right away is Kriegel's vocals are just as piercing as ever on this entire track, which is the title track, Atignatos. It's just insane to me how a guy who can still have that amount of energy and intensity with 8 records in, it's completely commendable how he is able to do that. The track shows intense riffing, folk instrumentation, and drumming, which is to be expected on an Helveti record. But with this track, it shows that they can demonstrate their creative songwriting and especially the drumming. Ackerman just decides to take what Merlin does and take it to another level in terms of creating more creative fills and grooves and hooks, and it's something that I've really wanted to see within the more percussion side of Helveti that wasn't there previously. So Ackerman is really holding down the fort on the rhythm section, and it's just mind-boggling to me how this guy is able to come up with all these crazy flam rolls and paradiddles and single stroke rolls and all these different rudiments that he's throwing in so seamlessly and effortlessly, and it blends so well with the group. I'm surprised they found this guy because he fits so well within the band. The title track is actually the Gaulish word for reborn, which is kind of the overarching theme on this record. A lot of these songs are very much about kind of going through adversity, going through this journey, and then kind of seeing the other side. That's my own interpretation of it anyways. I mean, when you have a band that's very creative when it comes to its songwriting, it can really paint a picture in the listener's head, especially on tracks like Deathwalker and Blackwater Dawn. It really reflects that overarching theme of this album. When you're reading lines like, "On this bridge so narrow, the Saudi rags fell off me. Robed in nakedness, I entered the gates." They really paint a picture to the listener and help them draw their own conclusion of what the idea of reborn or rebirth means to them. What I absolutely loved about this record is how it's very reminiscent of old material of Helveti. Tracks like A Cry in the Wilderness and The Raven Hill, it gave me that same nostalgic feeling that I got when I first listened to Everything Remains and Selenia. And it just shows that the band is still not shying away from ideas that have worked so well for them in the past, and they're kind of reinventing them into a new idea to help either for new listeners or for people like myself who follow the band for a while. It's the subtle elements of their songwriting of blending those kind of folk elements sparingly and then combining that with extreme metal. It just shows that the band is able to do this seamlessly, and it brings a lot of life into those 2 tracks. Embriamos and Breathe are 2 tracks which really demonstrate very straightforward song structure of showing very simple melodies and patterns, which are both driven by their newest member, Fabiana Erni. who arguably has to be one of the best new additions to the band. Her voice really lends itself to those two tracks and just demonstrates her amazing vocal range. Minus the Fury, Threefold Death, and Worship have to be some of the heaviest songs on an Helveti record I've ever heard. It's almost as if the band is showing a more extreme version of themselves, which was unexpected, to be completely honest with you, but it just shows that the band is still trying to reinvent themselves and continue doing so really well and experimenting with new styles. Rebirth pretty much sums up the overarching theme of this album, how it just shows everything that I talked about previously thrown into one track. Great vocals, great guitar playing, great drumming, great production, and just getting into a quick side note here, the production on this album is bloody fantastic. How nothing is buried in the mix, everything just blends really well, and you can really hear everybody's moments to really shine on this release. Everything blends really well, including using kind of the ambient elements of, rain and wind sounds and just different kind of choir elements that are thrown in. With all those little elements shining through, they really nailed it on the production front. There's nothing really bad to say about this record, but the only, negative thing is that if you're a longtime fan like myself, you can kind of see that the production standpoint of it may be a little bit similar to previous releases. Other people may have slept on Helveti will probably listen to this record and say they're just copying the same thing over and over again. But in my opinion, if it's not broke, why should it needs to be fixed? If it works for the band, and it works for the fans, then I see nothing wrong with it. So for me, the production works really well on this record, but other people who might have slept on the band might see that this is just a copy and paste of the same record. When you have key members of a band that leave to form their own thing, it really leaves essentially big shoes to fill, minus the horrible puns. But what's great about these new members is that they're able to form their own identity within the band, and it's almost like the band's theme, Rebirth, is essentially the kind of overarching theme with these new members of trying to find their own identity within Helveti. And it really shows within this new release. The band shows no signs of slowing down and continues to be the front runner of folk metal and pretty much an ambassador of the subgenre. This easily has to be one of my favorite albums I've listened to this year. And if I had to rank the albums of Helveti, I would actually put this second before Selenia. I think this might, for me, beats Everything Remains. The band did an amazing job on this album. That's why I'm giving Actignados 4.5 out of 5 skulls. All right, it's time for the shoutouts. We have 2 big releases that came out this week. Lord Dying's new album, Mysterium Tremendum, which came out on E1 Records. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to Sarah's band Smolder with their new album, Times of Obscene Evil and Wild Daring, out last week on Cruisedale Sur Music. So let us know in the comments what you guys think of Helveti's new album. Let us also know if you have any new folk metal albums that you're really wanting us to check out this year. And I'll be back next time to talk about some prog.